Hey everyone, I wanted to kind of talk about this new piece, and rather than write a long blog post like I normally do, I thought the genealogy of this piece is a little complicated, and I think it's something that's easier to just talk about than to write down. So let me just show it off first. So all you do is twist this little guy, and we get this nice back and forth motion. It uses magnets in a similar fashion to the module series, Mod 3 mini situation. So that is the easiest explanation of where this came from, but I want to kind of do the long explainer. So back in January of 2019, I was making a series of sculptures that was loosely based off of what you would call as an OTF, out the front mechanical knife mechanism. It's a, I don't know if you see them, it's like a switchblade where the blade just comes out the front of the handle instead of flipping out the side. So I thought that was kind of an interesting mechanic. And so what I ended up doing was redesigning all of that into a sculpture. And so this would be an out the front and out the back because it has a tail and a head. And so the mechanic is similar. This uses a series of springs and cams and lifters and a helical actuator to move this piece. And it was a really fun sculpture project to try and take a very simple mechanic and transform it into something sculptural, but it's a very complex mechanism. But I like the design, I like the mechanic. And a few people who saw it, rightly, suggested, hey, can you make that smaller? Can you make that into a pocket-sized piece? And the funny thing is that not every prototype I make ends up out in the world or ends up as a sculpture. So these are two attempts to shrink this mechanic down to something a little more manageable. Now, this one's a little bit bigger than this one. And this one is all stainless steel, and this thing is super heavy. So this is the same mechanism as the OTFB. Well, it's not the same mechanism. It's redesigned. So I tried to slim it down as much as I could without losing the original sort of intention of the mechanic. And what I ended up with is still the functionality is the same. And the mechanic works similarly. But it's slightly simpler, but it's also more finicky because when you shrink something down, tolerances count a lot more. Getting spring tension right is more difficult. And then I shrunk it even further. So I managed to squeeze basically slimming everything down a little at a time and seeing if I could get it to still work. So this one is anodized aluminum. So this is much lighter. And the final product is something that works. Works pretty good. These do have a tendency to misfire a little bit. This one especially because the spring tension's wrong. So it misfires and then you can just pull it and it resets. But I found that, to try and make something more accessibly and still have the sculptural qualities that I wanted and still be reliable, I at the time I couldn't get there. I still think this is a really interesting mechanism, but it kind of constrained me to a design that, while this is interesting looking, it's still missing something. I couldn't quite crack it at the time. And so I just kind of set it aside. So anyway, these just sat on a shelf for 2 years. And I'm still interested in this mechanism. If there's any engineers out there that wanted to look at this and take a crack at it, fast forward to this year, and I started my module series, and this is a completely different mechanic. But the third installment in the module series used a series of magnets, polarity switching magnets to create a linear motion. And this was sort of just an accidental mini version of the bigger sculpture. But I liked the way it worked. I liked the way it felt. and it sort of reminded me of those earlier pieces. And so that's basically what I did. I went back to the drawing board. I thought about that, OTF piece and its spin-off. And I thought, there's an opportunity to create a sculpture in that same spirit that has the same functionality, but using magnets instead of springs and lifters and catches, and to create a mechanism that's much more reliable. Inside of the center is another hub that has an array of 4 magnets on it, and then each of these ends has 4 magnets in it as well. Same thing, alternating polarity. And when I turn this outer ring, there's a dowel pin that runs through this and engages a center shaft. And so when I turn this, it turns that piece and switches which polarity is attracting on this side and repelling on this side to move the center shaft from side to side. This isn't going to fail. It's just magnets that flop it back and forth. So it's not going to misfire. It's not going to miscatch. And I didn't have the same constraints. This has a lot of guts in it. And how that all assembles really kind of limited me to what I could do in terms of design on the outside. And so this one gave me a lot more latitude to play and make an interesting art object. And so I really think that this is the piece that was meant to be made from that little idea. So, all things aside, that's the genealogy of how we got here. And I think that's as good an explanation as any in how, engineering and kind of just following an idea and being patient with it kind of leads to a future design or something like that. So I think that's a pretty good explanation.